Hey friends, I'm Marc Schelske, and this is the Apprenticeship Way, a podcast about spiritual growth following the way of Jesus. This is episode 57. Empathy is not a sin, it's holy dynamite. Today's podcast is made possible by Walking Otherward. This is my new book. It's due out in a couple of weeks. It's landing on February 18th. That means I'm up to my ears in book launch season. Look, I'm going to keep this short. I want you to pre-order my book right now. Is this the right book for you? Well, here's my pitch. You already know it's possible to be a Christian and not be very much like Jesus. Whether through your own study or your spiritual intuition, you sense that following the way of Jesus ought to be transformational for you and for your world. The urgent drive of our time to always be moving upward and forward has taken its toll on you. You suspect an inward focus is necessary for personal healing and growth, but wonder if that makes any real difference for others in the world around you. And you definitely don't want to go backward, whether to past ways of thinking that were destructive or back to a world that is more hierarchical, violent, and exploitative. Perhaps you feel homeless spiritually and wonder which way you should go. The gospel narrative of Jesus' life suggests a path. Rather than the climb upward or retreating backward or withdrawing inward, Jesus' path invites us to walk otherward. Walking Otherward is a 40-day devotional that follows Jesus in the final weeks leading to his crucifixion. Each reflection invites you to take on Jesus' attitude, exchanging self-centered, ego-defending ambition for other-centered, co-suffering love. So that's the pitch. If it sounds like a good fit for you, then please pre-order the book today. It's available in ebook and paperback and all the book places. You can find all the links to those places at www.walkingotherward.com. If you're on social media and you pay attention to the religious discourse there, in the past couple of months, you may have seen a surge in posts and memes arguing over an odd controversy. The controversy? The accusation that many Christians, apparently deceived by the radical left or someone, are falling into the sin of empathy. Now, that sounds strange to you. That probably means you are consuming an appropriate and healthy amount of social media. But what's even more strange than this accusation is that it's not new. In 2019, it first gained momentum when Joe Rigney, a prominent Reformed pastor and theologian, wrote an article on the Desiring God website called The Enticing Sin of Empathy: How Satan Corrupts Through Compassion. He was making the point that empathy is really the emotional fusion between your emotions and someone else's emotions that will keep you from living in accordance with the truth. Even worse, Rigney posed that empathy was a tool for emotional manipulation. He wrote, "Rightly used, empathy is a power tool in the hands of the weak and suffering. By it, we can so weaponize victims that they, or those who hide behind them, are indulged at every turn, without regard for whether such indulgence is wise or prudent or good for them." The topic came up again in 2021 when a well-known fundamentalist pastor, James White, wrote a scathing blog about the problem of empathy for Christians. These are his words. "So what is the problem with empathy today? We are in fact told to weep with those who weep. But that assumes those who weep have a reason for weeping that is in line with God's revelation." So I guess we're gatekeeping grief now? The topic resurfaced this year as Christians, in response to the elections and government policy discussions, have been debating the best way to relate to immigrants and the poor and trans people. So Joe Rigney comes back onto the scene, adding fuel to the fire with a brand new book that came out this year called The Sin of Empathy: Compassion and Its Counterfeits, where he claims that empathy is the greatest rhetorical tool of manipulation in the 21st century, and suggests that empathy is a satanic counterfeit to holy, godly love. Okay, I'll be upfront here. I think this claim is not only absurd, I think it's dangerous for the church and for society at large. I wanted to talk with somebody about it, and it seemed to me that a good conversation partner would be Felicia Murrell. Felicia is a former pastor, current spiritual director, author, and speaker, and I wanted to talk with Felicia specifically because I've recently read her book, and The Restorative Power of Love in an Either-Or World. This book is stunningly good. It weaves comfortably between memoir, essay, poetry, and prophetic challenge. And the principle at the heart of the book is that the only thing that can carry us through the chaos of the moment we find ourselves in is love. So I asked Felicia to chat with me about this controversy. And I started by asking her to define empathy and then to reflect on why it seems that this word is becoming a scare word for some folks.
Empathy is staying present to pain, that of my own and that of others, without being overwhelmed by it. Empathy is actively bearing witness to the emotional experience of other people without taking it. It's not delving into despair, or pity, or anguish. It literally is what I would call mirroring. A question that I ask myself often is, can I reach back into my own memory bank and connect to something in my lived experience? If that answer is no, because maybe I don't have a similar experience, empathy listens and it believes the experience of other people, even when our experiences don't match. An example would be, say someone is talking to me and they're expressing about being lonely. Can I remember a time in my own life where I've experienced loneliness? Not to center myself in the conversation and took over and start talking about when he was lonely, like, just to have feeling, to know and to remember what it felt like to be lonely, and to allow that feeling to be a place of connection and understanding. Brene Brown offers us this really powerful question to consider. And she says, how can I touch within myself something that helps me identify and connect with what this person might be feeling?
I like how you pointed out that we're reaching into that resource of our own experience, not to like generate relating words, like that common thing where you kind of have this motivation to tell a similar story, right? I know exactly what you're feeling. This is what happened to me. And now you're off and running on 3 or 5 minutes of your own story. But to reach into the resource of your own experience as a way to get closer to knowing within yourself what that other person is experiencing and articulating to you.
If it's an experience that, that's not my lived experience, I can't relate to that.
Mm.
Then what I do is I take on a listening posture of believing this person's experience and connecting to it as part of the universal body of humanity. What I'm reaching into is that shared humanity. That's empathy,
Okay.
right?
So
So that's why
that feels really essential to all human relationships, right? Like if I'm going to have a constructive relationship with anybody, it requires my capacity to think about the state that you're in and why you're in that state, and to hone my ability to listen and all of that. So that feels like, for partnerships, marriage, good parenting, leadership in organizations, like it feels really essential, right? So if that's such an essential core human function of healthy relationship, how do we get into this mess where it sounds scary to people? The Anglican Archbishop in DC had an opportunity to preach a sermon in front of the new president. And in the course of that sermon, actually made a call for empathy. And that call was reacted to by a lot of people online as being inappropriate, right? Which is crazy to me. Given that empathy is such an essential part of human connectedness, why is it a scare word for some people? What do you think about that?
I think there's 3 things that come to mind. Before I get into the one thing that I want to point out in what you were saying that is so key with empathy is we're relating to people as equal. The partnership of our humanity, right? It's not like a savior kind of thing where I'm reaching down to help less than, or those I pity, or those I see inferior, or something like that. This is about how I relate to shared humanity.
Okay.
on equal, and that equity is important to establish with empathy. But I think when we think about people using empathy as kind of a swear word, first I'm going to go to one of my own heroes, which is Brene Brown. And in her book, Atlas of the Heart, which really goes into language around emotion, she says that for some people, being a contrarian is seductive.
Mm-hmm.
And much of what we know about American Christianity is formed on ideas of protest,
Mm-hmm.
right? Protestant.
Sure. Right.
So I think there's some of that. But also, I think perhaps this idea of empathy feels scary really because of our own fear of pain, that to mirror someone else's suffering hits too close to home.
Mm-hmm.
It hits too close to the things that we numb, the things that we repress. And if we have not sat in our own darkness, we will never be able to have empathy for someone else in theirs, right? And so I think perhaps this constant unconscious participation in comparison has reduced empathy to a swear word. And what I mean by that is in a caste system of haves and have nots, when someone is higher or lower, you have this whole system of capitalism that works because we're conditioned really from school age, right? Um, where we don't want to be the one on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And so perhaps then there's a story that I'm unconsciously participating in where to express care, to express empathy would require something of me that would force me to abnegate my position or my wins. And
Mm.
I say unconsciously because not many people would admit aloud, not even to themselves, that that's something that they're weighing or measuring.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever is unconscious owns us, right?
Right.
So I think moving from that idea of contrarianism being productive to this idea of us not sitting with our own feelings and really running away from that just to have our win. It leads me to us versus them. When we have this us versus them, it creates others. And anytime we have others, that creates disconnection. And wherever there's disconnection, there's an unraveling of shared humanity. So back again to the idea that if we're not, then what are we? I see you as an opposition,
Mm-hmm.
or I see you as someone to pity, or someone I can dominate, but definitely not someone to relate to, right? And so I think some of these interior places where love is beckoning to heal and make it
Mm.
whole, reasons that keep us, you know, being able to relate to someone badly.
That's really helpful to me. Like what I'm hearing as you're talking about this is kind of an intersection between two domains. So there's this
Yeah.
interior personal domain, right? And maybe empathy is challenging me to face things that I haven't faced, that I haven't healed from, my own trauma story, or places in my life where I was treated unjustly, or perhaps places in my life where I exploited people, but don't want to think about that, don't want to carry the burden of that feeling. So anything that calls me to that opening of heart towards somebody else, that's fearful for me individually as a person, right? And the way out of that is going to be some kind of inner healing, maybe a spiritual process, maybe a therapeutic process, some kind of way of coming honestly to face myself, right? So that's one domain. But what you explained, this isn't just like a go into your quiet room and solve this problem. There's this system out there that we all live within. And what
Yes.
you said that I don't think it's even ever occurred to me before, was that maybe one of the reasons why empathy is scary is because empathy automatically challenges hierarchy.
Yes.
Right. So whatever hierarchy I'm in, whether that is, a patriarchal marriage where I'm the man and I'm in charge, or whether I'm in an organization that's very, very controlling from the top down, and I see what the organization is doing and it kind of feels unjust or unfair to me, and I want to speak up, or whether we're talking about a larger system like the country, or even, as you mentioned, an economic system like capitalism, empathy, because it's connecting to that other human at a peer level, empathy is inviting me to see them in a way that is outside of whatever hierarchy I'm a part of. And that's then where it becomes dangerous, right? Like when I think about the quotes that I shared of people who have been saying empathy is a sin, this would suggest that it's not coincidental that all the people saying that are within extremely hierarchical systems.
Absolutely.
Right. And so when they say it's dangerous for you to feel empathy, the subtext behind that is empathy might lead you to question the power system we're in. And I don't want you to do that. I have good biblical reason or good whatever reason to not want you to do that. So we're not going to think about that. Am I on track with that?
You're on track. Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, Heather Richards, who is a historian, I heard her a couple months ago on a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And on this podcast, she gave this analogy. She said, 10 people in a room, 8 of them just want to get by, right? But there are 2 people who want to control everybody else. And the way that they get that power is to get 6 people to turn against the 2 at the bottom.
Mm.
And the way that you do that is through the stories you tell. She calls it the 2-6. Okay, so you have 2 people that want power, and you have 6 people in the middle, and the 2 people at the top that want this power and this control, they get the 6 in the middle to turn against the 2 at the bottom
Mm-hmm.
through the stories that they tell. And she said that the reason why this is so significant is because the stories we tell about who we are and the communities are the way.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I feel like for me, right, when I think about this, I lived so much of my life as a catfish Christian. And coming from the South, fish in the river, fish just suck everything. Whatever is there, bottom feeders on there, and they eat it all. And that was me as a Christian for a long time. Swallowed everything that came from the pulpit. And then I regurgitated it, right? And I did that without any critical analysis, without any self-examination. I just simply trusted with abandon
Right.
and felt like fanaticism. And now I feel like I'm more apt to pause, and I'm more apt to look for the thread of love. And if I don't hear the resonance of love and the storytelling, I'm much more likely to come away from the beat, right? No matter how
Right.
sparkly and shiny it is. But we're talking about this, right? And so within the context of class, empire, capitalism, patriarchy, another one of my heroes, Bell Hooks, she talks about this system of domination as imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
That's how she names the system of domination. And so I think as Christians, you have to really travel back in the biblical narrative to the Garden of Eden for this discussion and to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so this whole idea about sin, now for me where I am in life, when I hear sin, I immediately think missing the mark.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think behavior or action, not identity.
Right.
But I also know that I haven't always thought that way.
Yes.
For a long time, sin was not an indication of misalignment. It was a stain. It was something to be ashamed of, something to hide, something to cover with figures, right? Like a dirty word. And so um, I'm thinking about sin in terms of purity culture as being everything that we don't want to be. And sin then being something that we have to root out of our lives, root out of our bodies, root out of our hearts and our cultures. Like in a sense, sin has to be annihilated, has to be conquered. And so anyone that's in position in this kind of cult-like group, when they hear the word sin, they immediately think, like from the tree of the knowledge of evil, oh, this is evil, this is bad, right? So now I have this label, sin of empathy. I have this identity. And if, as you just said, your leader holds this external authority and power over your agent,
Right.
if that leader, that pastor says it's bad, then you just fall in line, right? You disavow your support, you root out whatever this is, you annihilate it. And I think when you have that much unchecked power and people doing the thinking for you, people deciding for you what's good, what's bad, those people can name anything. And so the conjecture, I think, is that when we start a system that says to have faith is never to doubt, never to question, you see how easy it is for the two powerful people at the top to convince the 6 people in the middle to hand over their belief in ardent worship and fanaticism. So you can kind of see how someone in that position can throw this phrase out and then it take a life of its own.
Yeah, that's it's so clarifying, right? Because in that illustration of the 10 people, what tool exists to help the 6 in the middle see through the machinations of the 2? Well, it's your essential humanity. Those 6 in the middle look at the 2 that have been put in the under position and say, wait a minute, that seems odd. They're not really that different from us, right? And we need to make a change. And so then the empathy, that connecting human to human peer connection, is actually the dynamite that blows up that system, right? And so in any of those categories that you mentioned that you brought from bell hooks, right? So if we're talking patriarchy, anyone who feels empathy for the burden that a woman is forced to carry in society, that empathy is the open doorway to begin questioning patriarchy. In, let's say, white supremacy, right? Many of folks who are of my complexion don't consider themselves white supremacists because they've been programmed that that phrase means a certain kind of violent, hood-wearing, sort of spitting out hatred. That's what that means. And that's not them. Authentically, it's not them. But they haven't been able to see how, or perhaps the fear around identity is so strong they're not willing to see how, that they have had certain advantages, even in the context of many disadvantages that they might have because of class or other things. They've had certain advantages that other people that aren't white don't have. And empathy is the key, right? Where you see that other person and you're like, for instance, I've never had the experience of getting pulled over while white. Right? Like every time I've been pulled over in my life, there's been a good reason for it. And not only that, but I haven't authentically felt fear for my life in those moments. Right. And so that moment when I have a conversation with somebody that has had the experience of being pulled over for driving while black and sat in the car with their hands on the steering wheel, terrified about, is this going to go wrong? I hear that story and the empathy in me says traffic stop shouldn't feel life-threatening. What the hell's going on, right? And so now that empathy is the key, opening the doorway to questioning that white supremacist system or the system of how we use policing or whatever. And there are people in the room that don't want me questioning those things.
Right. Is there a lived experience that I've had that I can connect to this feeling? So my first question is there ever a time where I have been absolutely afraid for my life and I felt that energy running through my body, that I was scared that I was going to lose my life if I moved wrong, if I said something wrong? If there is, then I immediately have a sense of connection, right? And if I stand myself to remember I had this moment and I come up with the answer no. I can touch my heart, express gratitude to myself that that's not my experience, and at the same time, express a deep sense of remorse and care
Mm.
that someone else did have to have that experience,
Yeah.
right? Because part of our shared humanity is that we hold triumph, tragedy, we hold joy,
Yeah.
and I think tree of the knowledge of good and evil wants us to split the poles and divide them into binaries with them in between.
Mhm.
And it is the thread that weaves us together, right? We're holding this together in wholeness in the circle of life. Most people have done exactly what you were saying in the intro. They try to make empathy about taking on, walking in someone else's shoes, taking on someone else's feelings, feeling their pain. I just need to remember that we're both human,
Yes.
right? And
Right.
so, can I connect to a shared humanity? Can I remember what it was like to not have to be worried about,
Hmm.
to experience betrayal, to lose a parent, or have grief about? And what did that feel like in my body? What was the visceral feeling of that
Right.
thing, right? And then from there, I remember, and I can hold space. I don't have to correct the feelings. I'm not trying to judge it. I'm not trying to analyze it, fix it. I'm there to bear witness and to be with because, oh, there by the grace of why,
So something just occurred to me while you were saying that. I want to see what you think about this. So at the beginning in our conversation, when you were defining empathy, you talked about it being this mirror function where I'm relying on my own experience as a way to connect with this other person. All right. So if I'm in a system that is telling me that I can't feel empathy for someone else that is being injured or treated unfairly, and it's for good reasons, right? Like I shouldn't feel empathy for them because we're asking them to do the right godly thing and they're not doing it, and they should feel sad about that. So don't feel empathy for them, right? If I'm in that system and I've bought into that because of this mirror function, what also is happening is I'm being trained to ignore my own feelings of injustice perpetrated against me. Do you feel like that's right connection?
oh, absolutely. And any particularly woman inside of evangelical Christianity has been trained to ignore. You've been trained to be a martyr. You
Yeah.
serve your family, you serve the church, you deny what you're doing to the depth of you.
Okay, so the premise of this podcast is thinking about how we practice the way of Jesus. So let's bring the conversation of empathy into that domain. How does this picture of empathy you've talked about, this mirror connection between peers, depending on the resource of your own experience to understand the internal experience of another person, allowing that then to shape the way you relate to them, how do you see that fitting into the calling of what it means to follow Jesus and live that out in the world that we find ourselves in?
So I think for me, when I think about the way of Jesus and I think about empathy, empathy is about emotional attunement. It's about being moved, right? And so like understanding either what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, or what someone is experiencing, and I'm reflecting back that understanding. I'm not rescuing, not fixing, again, all those things. And when I think about the way of Jesus, perhaps the most intentional thing that comes to mind is the story of the Good Samaritan. When you think of this story from the perspective of what was most helpful to the person who was injured in a moment when they couldn't necessarily articulate what they needed. So I want you to think about that. Also think about who chose to pass this injured party by,
Mhm.
right? Why did Jesus include those two examples of who was too busy to care, who
Yeah.
was too busy to demonstrate action, right? Love and action. So a good Samaritan stops, and or the Samaritan, we don't have to say, good, but a Samaritan stops. And this person is thinking, what might I need in this moment, right? To take a beat, I can pause. If I was injured, I would need some rest. Okay, rest is important. So let me go pay the innkeeper some money so the injured party has somewhere to rest and recover, right? And oh, they might need some food. And there might be some other things that I haven't even processed or considered. So let me leave a little extra money with the innkeeper for whatever needs might arise that I haven't considered. So what I can give in this moment to this injured party, I can give this person the means to recover and get well, right? By helping to provide a place for them to stay. And I can give them aid to help them return to well. And that is what empathy does, right? Empathy is a skill, right? Compassion is the daily practice, but empathy is the skill. And I don't think we get to empathy without having that place within ourselves with spirit, where we learn to develop the spaciousness to think about what I myself might need. What do I need in this moment? When I get triggered, when I get anxious, what do I need for my own well being? And when I can learn what I need for my own well being, then I'm able to give out of the overflow of how I tend to myself to someone else.
Mm.
Right? And so I think in that regard, this is the way of Jesus. This is mutuality, it's reciprocity, it's self-giving kenotic love. All these big words that really just explain relational understanding and action,
Hmm.
right? How do I take action to demonstrate love and care toward myself? How do I demonstrate love and care toward my neighbor? How do I demonstrate love and care in the world around me? That's the way of
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. And one of the lines that I underlined, I think is appropriate right here. You wrote, "This is my holy sacrament to fully and consciously participate with self-emptying love in this present moment." And I think the connection there is that full participation, I think, is that the connection to empathy, right? That if I'm engaging with a person that's right in front of me, for me to fully be present in that moment, I'm reaching into that resource of my experiences to connect with them. If this is self emptying love, I'm giving of myself. And that might be the time to stop and listen. It might be the effort to be involved in a difficult emotional conversation. It might be resources. It might be all kinds of things that the cost is that I didn't have to be in this moment with this person. I'm opening myself up to be present to what is happening for that person and what is that going to ask of me? Right. And that sounds an awful lot like, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah. I wrote in A, empathy transcends the imagining of a life we never have to live, making the connection that allows our hearts to break open to painful, fearful, or even joyous experiences. Intimate, empathetic knowing allows for sympathetic resonance, a melding of forged in the weaving of stories, lives together until there is only the story, which is the restoration of all things, as all embrace divine unity in the encounter of love. Love is infinite, and in the bounty of love, we are held and we are known. And I think when we come to know that knowing ourselves, right, when we know when we can hear the sound of the genuine within, we have that space to tend to ourselves. And what happens, that becomes the practice of how we tend to the world. I don't think the two are separate. I think that word and is very important. But I also think, as you were saying, I think it's intentional that all of this is squashed within systems so that you don't have the space to hear yourself or even really know yourself, right? And I think as we accept love's invitation, to come close, to tend to the wounds, to show ourselves, to, you know, spirit heal those wounded places within us, and the wounds within the world. You turn around and with your eyes, you see this invitation to participate with love in the world. And that goes back to Bell Hooks. She was really clear about the only thing that could build the systems of domination was a love ethic.
Mhm.
She firmly believed that, and she championed love as a to the world social. And I agree with her.
This conversation with Felicia really was a moment of dot connecting for me. Certain people want you to be suspicious of empathy because empathy is the key that opens the chains of hierarchical control. The moment you think about and relate to the lived experience of the person on the other end of oppression is the moment you start to question the rightness of that oppression. I guess that's why the accusation of empathy as a sin always seems so strange to me. Of course God wants you to feel empathy. How did Jesus open up his ministry? Luke chapter 4, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Following a mission like that evokes empathy. It requires empathy. Empathy for the blind, the poor, the captive. Empathy for everyone who isn't experiencing a year of the Lord's favor, but instead is experiencing the weight of another year of confusion or marginalization or exploitation or suffering. Empathy calls us to act. And if God gave us empathy, then God designed empathy to move us to act in ways that bring about God's purpose of restoration and reconciliation. So I guess empathy really is dangerous if you're trying to control people. If you're hoping to manipulate them, if you want to exploit and control others, then empathy must be fought against, because empathy is the God-given dynamite that can blow up your carefully crafted system of domination. So, no, I won't be praying for freedom from the sin of empathy for me or anyone else. I will be praying for the Spirit of God to raise up empathy in the church so that we can be part of God's good work of liberation now and salvation forever. May you find the deep connection between your empathy and the Spirit of God's call to stand with and for those God wants to lift up. Thanks for listening. If this conversation has intrigued you, I recommend Felicia Murrell's fantastic book, And, the full title, And, the Restorative Power of Love in an Either-Or World. I very rarely reread books, and I've already reread this one twice in 1 year. It's just so good. You can find it in all the book places. You can also learn more about Felicia and what she's up to at her website, www.feliciamurrell.com. Notes for today's episode, a transcription, and any links that are relevant will be found at marcellenschelske.com/TAW057. Did you like this? Well, there's more. Subscribe to Apprenticeship Notes, my email newsletter. It's monthly-ish, honestly, 8 to 10 times a year, depending on what I have to say and what else is going on in my life. It includes an exclusive essay you won't find anywhere else, insider commentary on my podcast and blog posts, books I recommend, spiritual practices, and more. And when you subscribe, you get a free little book I wrote called The Anchor Prayer, a prayer and practice for remaining grounded in a chaotic world. In this little book, I teach a spiritual practice that has been so helpful to me as I face the anxiety and uncertainty of our time. So subscribe, get my email newsletter, get that book, sign up for it at www.marcoptin.com. Until next time, remember, in this one present moment, you are loved, you are known, and you are not alone.